He could not read a single word. He had no army, no throne, no kingdom, just a name no one feared yet. He was abandoned as a child, enslaved as a teenager, and had every reason to disappear into the dust of history. Yet within one lifetime, this man would conquer more land than any ruler who ever lived. His name was Temujin. The world would come to know him as Genghis Khan. If you love stories that flip everything you thought you knew about history, subscribe right now, because what you are about to hear is not a legend. Every word of it is true. This is the real story of how one man, with no formal education and no ability to read, built an empire so vast it changed the course of human civilization forever. Stay with us. It gets extraordinary fast. To understand Genghis Khan, you first have to understand where he came from. Not a palace, not a dynasty, a tent on the open steppe. Around 1162 AD, a boy was born near the Onon River in what is now northern Mongolia. His father, Yesugei, was a minor Mongol chieftain, not powerful by any real measure, but respected enough among his small clan. On the very day his son was born, Yesugei returned from battle, having captured a Tatar warrior named Temujin Uge. He named his newborn son after that enemy. The child came into the world already carrying the weight of conflict in his name. The Mongol steppe in the 12th century was one of the harshest environments on earth. There were no cities, no courts, no written laws. Life was organized around nomadic clans, small, fragile groups of families who survived by herding, raiding, and constant negotiation with nature and neighboring tribes. Violence was not exceptional here. It was ordinary. Alliances between clans shifted like the wind, and betrayal was as common as loyalty. When Temujin was around 9 years old, his father rode with him to a neighboring tribe, the Ongirats, to arrange a future marriage for him. It was a customary practice. The boy was left there to serve in the household of his intended bride's family, as was tradition, to prove his worth. On the ride home, Yesugei stopped to share food with a group of Tatars. They poisoned him. By the time word reached the family, Yesugei was dead. What happened next reveals everything about the world Temujin had been born into. The clan that Yesugei had led, his own people, refused to accept a widow and a child as their future. They packed up and left. They abandoned Holun, Temujin's mother, along with her children, in the middle of the steppe. No food stores, no animals, no protection. Just the cold, the grass, and the sky. Most families in that situation simply died. But Holun was not most women. She kept her children alive by foraging for roots, berries, pine nuts, and wild plants. She taught them to fish with bone hooks in the frozen rivers. Temujin, still just a child, learned what survival looked like up close. Not as an idea, but as a daily fight. It was during these years that the first dark glimpse of who Temujin truly was began to emerge. He and his half-brother Begter argued over food and game, a dispute that, on the steppe, could mean the difference between life and death. Temujin, together with his brother Kasar, killed Begter. He was approximately 11 years old. This was not the act of a villain in a story. This was a child in a world without mercy, making a brutal calculation. But it tells us something important. Temujin did not hesitate when survival demanded action. Not long after, a raid by his father's old clan, the Taichut, led to Temujin being captured and enslaved. He was forced to wear a kangwe, a heavy wooden yoke locked around his neck that prevented him from feeding or caring for himself. He was treated as property, passed between households, watched constantly. Most men in that position accepted their fate. Temujin waited, observed, and escaped. He slipped away at night, hid in a river, and was sheltered by a family who risked everything to help him. He survived not through brute strength, but through patience and intelligence, two qualities that would define him for the rest of his life. As Temujin entered his teenage years, he began rebuilding. He formed a blood brotherhood, an anda, with a man named Jamuka, a bond considered as sacred as family on the steppe. He reclaimed Berta, the young woman his father had arranged for him to marry. And then, shortly after their union, Berta was kidnapped by the Merkit tribe, a rival group seeking revenge for an old wound. This moment, the kidnapping of Berta, was the turning point. Rather than accepting the loss as the cost of steppe life, Temujin called in every alliance he had. He appealed to Togrul, the powerful leader of the Kerit tribe, who had been a sworn friend of his father. He reached out to Jamuka. Together they assembled a force, rode against the Merkits, and recovered Berta. Temujin had launched his first real military campaign. He was a teenager. He had no title. And he won. Word traveled across the steppe the way it always did, through the mouths of riders and traders. Temujin was different. He did not fill positions of command based on the bloodlines of old families. He promoted men based on skill, courage, and loyalty. A shepherd's son could rise to lead 1,000 warriors if he proved himself. A captured enemy who showed ability could be absorbed and trusted. This was revolutionary in a world that ran entirely on birth and blood. Over the following years, through a combination of brilliant strategy, targeted warfare, and an ability to forge loyalty that no other leader on the steppe had demonstrated before, Temujin began absorbing rival tribes one by one. Some he defeated in battle, some he brought in through diplomacy. His oldest ally, Jamuka, who represented the old way of noble Mongol leadership, eventually became his greatest rival. Their friendship fractured into open war. Temujin defeated him. Jamuka, according to historical accounts, was executed, but because Temujin respected him deeply, he was granted a bloodless death, the highest honor a warrior of the steppe could receive. In 1206 AD, Temujin called a grand assembly known as a Kurultai on the banks of the Onon River, the same river where he had been born. Every Mongol tribe, now united under a single banner for the first time in history, gathered there. At that assembly, he was proclaimed Genghis Khan, a title meaning universal ruler. He was roughly 44 years old. He had been a slave. He had been abandoned. He had never read a book. And he had just unified the most fearsome cavalry culture the world had ever produced. What followed was unlike anything in recorded history. The Mongol military machine that Genghis Khan built was terrifyingly effective. His cavalry units could cover up to 100 miles in a single day using a system of remounted horses called a string. Each rider controlled several horses and switched between them to maintain speed over enormous distances. Armies of that era typically moved 10 to 15 miles a day. The Mongols moved at a pace that was simply incomprehensible to their enemies. Their tactics were equally innovative. The feigned retreat, in which Mongol cavalry appeared to flee, drawing pursuing armies into open ground before wheeling back to destroy them, was executed with such discipline that enemies who knew about it still fell for it. Psychological warfare was used deliberately and systematically. Cities that surrendered without resistance were spared and often flourished under Mongol rule. Cities that resisted were annihilated. This was not random cruelty, it was policy, designed to reduce the cost of conquest and speed the advance. Genghis Khan attacked the Sisha dynasty, then turned the full weight of the Mongol force against the Jin dynasty of northern China. Beijing, then called Zhongdu, fell in 1215. From Chinese engineers he adopted siege technology the Mongols had never possessed before: catapults, battering rams, fire weapons. He did not dismiss knowledge because it came from a conquered people. He absorbed it. He turned their expertise into his own power. He then turned west. The Khwarezmian Empire, one of the largest and most powerful states in Central Asia, was destroyed in just 2 years between 1219 and 1221. The great cities of Samarkand and Bukhara, among the wealthiest and most cultured in the Islamic world, were reduced to rubble. The Shah of Khwarezm fled and died in exile on an island in the Caspian Sea. His empire ceased to exist, and still the question remains: How did a man who could not read or write manage to govern all of this? The answer is genuinely astonishing. Genghis Khan understood something that many educated rulers never grasped. Knowledge is not stored in books, it lives in people. He surrounded himself with the most capable advisors, scholars, engineers, and administrators from every people he encountered. He listened. He remembered. By all historical accounts, his memory was extraordinary. He retained names, faces, details of conversations and negotiations years after they occurred. He commissioned the creation of a written script for the Mongol language, adapted from the Uyghur script, specifically so that his laws and decrees could be recorded and communicated across the empire. He could not write them himself, but he understood that without a written system, the empire could not function. He used other minds to do what his own hands could not. He created the Yasa, a comprehensive code of law that governed the entire Mongol Empire. It standardized behavior, established rules for trade and diplomacy, and applied equally across all peoples under Mongol rule. He enforced religious freedom across all conquered territories. Christians, Muslims, Buddhists, Taoists, shamanists, all were permitted to practice their faith without interference. This was not idealism. It was pragmatic governance. Persecution creates resistance. Tolerance creates stability. He built the Yam, a postal relay system of mounted riders stationed every 25 miles across the entire empire. Messages could travel from one end of the Mongol world to the other in days. Trade along the Silk Road exploded. Merchants were protected. Bandits were executed. For a period known to historians as the Pax Mongolica, the Mongol Peace, a traveler could move from China to Eastern Europe with more safety than at almost any other point in that era. Genghis Khan died in 1227. The exact cause remains unknown to this day. Some accounts suggest he died from injuries after falling from a horse. Others suggest illness. By his own orders, his burial site was kept completely secret. The soldiers who buried him were reportedly killed to protect the location. To this day, his tomb has never been found. But his legacy could not be buried. The Mongol conquests that he began killed an estimated 40 million people, a figure that represented perhaps 10% of the entire global population at the time. The destruction wrought by his successors, including the sacking of Baghdad in 1258, which ended the Islamic Golden Age, represented one of the most catastrophic events in human history. Entire cities vanished. Libraries that held centuries of accumulated knowledge burned. The Tigris River, according to historical accounts, ran dark from the ink of destroyed manuscripts, and yet the same empire that caused this destruction also connected the world in ways it had never been connected before. Knowledge, art, and technology moved along the Silk Road at a scale previously impossible. The very plague that would devastate Europe in the 14th century traveled those same routes, but so did papermaking, printing techniques, and advances in astronomy and medicine. A 2003 genetic study published in the American Journal of Human Genetics found that approximately 0.5% of all men alive today, an estimated 16 million people, carry a Y chromosome lineage traced back to a single individual living in Mongolia around the time of Genghis Khan. He is, in all probability, the most reproduced human male in recorded history. He never read a book. He never signed his own name. He grew up abandoned, enslaved, and starving on a frozen steppe. And he built an empire that stretched from the Pacific Ocean to the banks of the Danube River, the largest contiguous land empire in the history of the world. No one before him achieved it. No one after him has come close. If this story made you see history differently, hit that like button and share it with someone who thinks they already know everything worth knowing. Subscribe so you never miss a story told this way. And if you want to go even deeper, our next video covers another ruler who rewrote the rules of power in ways that still shape the world you live in today. Click right here to watch it next. We will see you there.